Alright, welcome to my PowerPoint about the Shark Punching Center. As you can probably hear if you've seen other videos from this channel before, I am not Dusty. You may call me Tharson. I have been invited to make this video because it's something we both share an interest in. Well, not this specifically, just SCP in general. This is kind of my area of specialties because I am what Dusty likes to say, a LARPer. Now, what even is the Shark Punching Center from a meta standpoint? So this is quite commonly known. SPC is a type of SCP. This was made into like a meme about this alternate foundation where instead of securing, containing, protecting all these SCPs, they instead just punch the heck out of sharks. That is their entire thing. That is their entire premise. They punch sharks. If you do not like that premise or don't find it funny, you will hate this place. But if you find that even somewhat funny, this is kind of the idea. So in universe, this is where things get messy. So obviously, in the SCP Foundation, there is no set canon, right? This is something that's said a lot. Obviously, there's a bunch of strings of events, but there's no guideline, so to say. Except for this one. There are two different ways Shark Punching Center gets used in the wiki, and that is it's either a GOI, group of interest, or it exists in a separate AU called the Sharkist Timeline. Now, this isn't a rule of thumb, right? I've read many of an SCP where the Shark Punching Center exists outside the Foundation universe, but that isn't part of the Sharkist Timeline. But if you see from my graph here, in the Sharkist Timeline, it is a GOI. The SPC is a group of interest in the Sharkist Timeline. However, just because the Shark Punching Center exists does not necessarily mean it is from the Sharkist Timeline, right? That is the key thing to know. They are similar, but very, very different. And we'll go over these differences because they are actually quite important. And that is the SPC as a GOI. This is the most generic Shark Punching Center ever, really. And that's not an insult. It is the bread and butter. It's the white coleslaw of the very mixed dish that is Shark Puncher lore. This varies heavily from writer to writer, right? This is the most flexible way to use the Shark Punching Center. It can fit into whatever mold you want. You want it to be like this mysterious alternate foundation that the SCP doesn't really know about, or they could just be hillbilly bombs, right? It exists drastically from writer to writer, but typically they do exist in the base SCP universe, the Foundation verse. Not always. I give an example here of SCP-1767. Don't laugh. As an example of the SPC as being from outside the base Foundation universe. But again, not the Sharkist Timeline. We'll get to the Sharkist Timeline. I swear I'll stop edging it. Now, most, if not all, actual SCP articles have this kind of SPC content. And what I mean by that is, how I give that example of SCP-1767. That is what I mean by actual SCP articles. Obviously, I'm not discrediting any of the writing that isn't a traditional SCP article. Tales are great. Canons are my thing. But in terms of actual SCPs, this is where the Shark Punching Center is most commonly used as, right? And that is because it is very generic. And you can do whatever you want with it. Okay. Strap in for this one, because things are about to get real. The SPC as an alternate canon, which is the Sharkist Timeline. This has a very strict set of events. This is its own universe, its own canon. There are rules to this timeline. It is heavily inspired by Dejoric, and I'll get into Dejoric in the next slide, but keep that guy in mind. This has the most fleshed out Shark Punching Center ever. And that is specifically because it is an alternate timeline where people can add to it and build upon it over time. It has so much lore. It is kind of groundbreaking. You can get lost in the articles just reading through everything. And it's all pretty good. And the thing about the Sharkus timeline is that it weighs really heavily into the idea that this is an alternate foundation. This is an alternate universe. So there is the Marine Fighting Team, which is clearly a parody of the Mobile Task Forces, that sort of thing. There's Sharkism, which is a clear play on Sarkism, which is another GOI within the Foundation, within the wiki specifically. There's like a parallel universe, Iris. So it weighs very heavily into that sort of thing. You feel me? There's also this entity that is very important known as the Mistaken Beast. The Mistaken Beast in the Sharkus timeline kind of lore is the meta, physical manifestation of the very first typo someone made of SCP into SPC. And what is really unique about this timeline, and what I actually really enjoy about it, is that they are aware they're a joke. They are aware that they are not the original universe. They know that they are a spin-off of the SCP Foundation, and they react very not really caring about it, right? They know they're a joke, and they're embracing it. They know, because what matters to them still matters, even if it's technically a joke, right? And we'll get over to the Mistaken Beast in the next slide. Dejoric is a madman, and we will go to him soon. But the Sharkus timeline has so much lore. They got binding vows in there. If any of y'all seen JJK, it's crazy. There's walking dolphins. I'm not gonna get too into it because I think you should just read it for yourself. But the next bullet point is that there are actual SPC articles similar to SCP articles. With Salatian punching techniques instead of just containment procedures. And most, if not all, SPC articles take place within the Sharkus timeline. And I say most, if not all, because, someone's probably going to make an SPC article not in this timeline, and it's just going to make this entire point invalid. But this is kind of where the main lore world building is from. It gives a lot of backstory and insight into different factions, different GOIs that exist within the Sharkus timeline. And it's kind of the main driver of this canon, because it is its own canon. This image I pulled up is from the Canon Hub. And I think enough stalling. Let's talk about Dejoric. And Dejoric is a user who I think his account is deleted. No, his account is deleted. You can't find it anymore. Anyway, he created the best Shark Puncher content to ever exist in the form of SCP-1449. He also created, in my opinion, the second best tale related to the Shark Punching Center, and it always has been, and it always has not been. This is a cold take, by the way. These are the greatest content you can get from this universe, from this entire bit, really. And I'm not going to explain SCP-1449 because you should just read it for yourself, right? But basically, it's about a dot sculpture whale shark. Sleep next to it, you get dreams. And using a bunch of articles, incident reports, it reveals the origin of the center, really. And that is that there was this reality-bending shark which they killed, and from its death, the Shark Punching Center universe was born. Right? So, and does that sound somewhat familiar? That is the Mistaken Beast. They killed the Mistaken Beast, or at least the Mistaken Beast has some influence on reality, and that's where the Shark Punching Center thrives. And it's important to note that the Sharkus timeline came after SCP-1449. So this was a backwards compatibility thing. Dejoric most likely had zero influence on the Sharkus timeline. Him as a writer, or them as a writer, my bad. And they were pretty open about how much this has been an inspiration to the Sharkus timeline, and you can really see that. It's very absurdist, very out there, it's just a lot of fantasy, gobbledygook, said throughout the stories in the SCP article, and that is very seen in the Sharkus timeline. And SCP-1449 is a very clear inspiration throughout the world building and honestly kind of tone of the Sharkus timeline. This is the most important thing to Shark Puncher to ever exist, in my opinion. Well, except for the tale. Onto the tale, this was also written by Dejoric. It always has been, it always has not been. And this is important because it is also a base inspiration for the Sharkus timeline. But it's also, I keep saying also important. My bad. This is very casual in tone. Womp womp, deal with it. Establishes a foundation for the humor of SPC. SPC humor is very, if you like it, you like it. If you hate it, you hate it. And it's very much this over-the-top, macho, aggressive, jock, surfer dude sort of vibe. A lot of sex jokes as well, which is not that surprising because the Shark Punching Center is meant to be this parallel SCP foundation, you know? And SPC is very clinical, very professional. And what's the opposite of professional than talking about orgies every like 3 sentences? It's also, I admit, probably in this tale because it's just baseline teenager humor, you know. Haha, they talked about orgies and sex. I understand that, but it's does help serve the narrative that this is a parallel, contrasting foundation to the, well, SCP foundation. And another thing that the tale does is that it kind of reinforces and reestablishes, gives a nice base to the idea that the SPC is this dream-like reality where it's just random BS everywhere. Like, there's a scene in this tale where there's just a bunch of paintings of people fucking each other or punching sharks. Like, what the hell? What are we doing anymore? And that kind of is the vibe of Shark Puncher, at least the Sharkus timeline. There's a lot more serious articles. But these two pieces of media, again, made by the same guy, same person, I don't know their gender, it kind of serves as this very clear inspiration, this clear base, these foundational roots for the most established lore about the Shark Punching Center. And if you ever want to get into this kind of canon GOI, you have to read these two. If you don't read these two, you won't understand anything. And not because they're particularly plot relevant, it's just that they really help kind of elaborate on the world. And it's really interesting how much influence this one guy had on this completely separate spin-off media. He had like no hand in. He's not like credited as like a creator of the Sharkus timeline. Like, he's credited as an inspiration, and that's clear even if they didn't credit him. It was credited by these 2 other people. I know one of them was named Mr. Wong. I can't remember the other one. My bad. But yeah, that's really big for basically a bit. And so that's the Sharkus timeline. What are some commonalities between the two? Well, they punch sharks and hate sharks. That is very clear. That's their entire thing. But oftentimes they have some sort of like trans-dimensional / reality warping capabilities. They usually are able to visit universes or have like the technology where other people in that universe can visit the Foundation verse. It's just a convenient writing tool, to be honest. Like, that's why it's so common in SPC articles. Another very important thing about this Shark Punching Center is that they're all joke articles. Like, even the Sharkus timeline is a bit. Like, remember those dolphin people I was talking about? Yeah, they're dolphin freedom fighters. That's stupid. It's great. You know, this entire thing is a gigantic, decades-long spanning bit about people who are really into punching animals. And so, while serious shark punching articles exist, I can't remember the name of it, but there's one about like cupcakes, and the Shark Punching Center are like a big role in that article. There's still a lot of absurdist themes and just out there ideas. Like there is a grandma who unhinges her jaw and spews out a fountain of water in a swimsuit. That's not like laugh out loud funny, but it's humorous. Fun image to conjure up. Speaking of which, usually Shark Punching Center articles and canons employ anahumans and anomalous technology fairly liberally, and I think that's because it like helps the idea, the fantasy Shark Punching Center is trying to sell of this stupid alternate foundation, and anomalous humans are almost always locked up in the SCP Foundation. And so when the writer has this chance to kind of basically make a superhero, they're gonna take it. It's 9 times out of 10 they're self-inserts. Like, let's be honest here. But they're still cool. There's one who has like a robot arm. That's pretty neat. And from a like in-universe standpoint, this leads great into the idea that the SCP Foundation and the Shark Punching Center are like rivals. They have conflicting ideologies. I feel like the Shark Punching Center has conflicting ideologies with everyone on the universe, but I digress. So it just kind of helps that leeway, In conclusion, these guys are weirdos, like really weird. Every Shark Punching content is weird on purpose, and it's great. It's very absurdist, very fantastical, very comedic, and it's also really gory, which is, I think, to be expected. Recommended reading. All of the Jorg stuff. Read it. It is very important. Read 10 a.m. Read Cerulean Glove if you're into the Sharkus timeline. Read World Iris if you're into the Sharkus timeline. That's kind of it in terms of reading I would recommend. The Mistaken Beast doesn't have its own dedicated article because according to the canon website, the guys who came up with it kind of left the wiki, and so it wouldn't really feel right to write that article without them. But the Mistaken Beast is canon in that timeline. And it's just a really interesting idea. Overall, it's a solid 7 out of 10. Like, it's a joke GOI, I acknowledge that. But it's just interesting to me how much the joke has evolved over the years. That is an interesting thing, especially because, over time, new writers come in with new ideas. Memes, it's a meme. Memes evolve over time as well. And so, something very similar in terms of internet culture has been reflected into the Shark Punching Center. Going from, 2014 humor into something more bits, snappy bits, there's the Shark Punting Center article. It's very quick, snappy, very, quick chuckle, instead of just being over the top 24/7. And I think that's for the better, But yeah, that is my presentation. Long live the Shark Punching Center. Hoorah.